Welcome to ADRRN Dialogues, where we bring you real stories from communities living on the front lines of climate change. Across Asia, a lot of local organizations are leading bold and practical solutions to the challenges that these communities face every day. Now, this series is about their ideas, their experiences, and what the rest of the world can learn from them. In this episode today, we're speaking with Ranita Sharma and Ignatius Prabhakar from the Sustainable Environment and Ecological Development Society, that is SEEDS India, about their work in bioshield restoration for community resilience in coastal Tamil Nadu. The project aims to restore native vegetation, enhance ecosystem services, and build community capacity for nature-based adaptations. So welcome, Ranita and Prabhakarji. It's great to have you with us today on ADRRN Dialogues. If we could begin with both of you telling us a little bit about what SEEDS is, what your work is about, and what you're doing on the coastline of Tamil Nadu.
Well, thank you so much, Chiti. Prabhakarji and I are very pleased to be here. SEEDS has been working in India for more than 3 decades now, and our journey began with disaster response and recovery. Over the last few years, we've been working massively to cater natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, cyclones, and lately heat waves, which is the impending concern. And one thing that became very clear to us that recovery in vulnerable communities is never about short term, A disaster may last a few days or a few hours, but the impact stays for years. So, especially for the coastal communities whose livelihoods massively depend on the seashore, or their livelihoods are depending on activities such as fishing. So, Tamil Nadu became a very important geography for us in this regard because the coastal line is repeatedly affected with cyclones, storm surges, coastal erosion, and of course, the long shadow of the 2004 tsunami that hit. And many of these communities have rebuilt themselves. So when you work there long enough, you realize that resilience not only means rebuilding after damage. So the conversation has to shift towards how do we reduce the risk before the next disaster arrives. So this is where our bioshield intervention comes in. So with the support of ADRRN through the locally led adaptation grant, SEEDS is developing a multi-layered bioshield plantation across the fishing communities of Chengalpettu and Cuddalore district using native coastal species. This layered approach, because coastal ecosystems don't function in a single line of trees. So different grass, trees, shrubs, they all play a different role. So soil stabilizing, some reduced wind speed, some create long-term recovery. And I'm sure Prabhakarji will probably enlighten us a little bit or more of the information in due course. But for cyclone-prone coasts like Tamil Nadu, even reducing the force of wind for erosion slightly can make a difference for the communities, which are living right next to the sea, especially households with children, elderly, people with disabilities, and so on. These bioshields, essentially, they protect their homes, boats, nets, which are their priority for livelihood dependency, and also in the same time, restoring the degraded coastal stretches. So we think that what makes it important is to shift the conversation from only after disasters to building the resilience before a disaster strikes. So ultimately, the question is not just about how do we restore a coastline, but how do communities continue living safely and sustainably and increase their resilience in becoming climate vulnerable.
Prabhakarji, if you would like to add to that.
Its point of view, there was an activity similar to it like during 2008. That was a long time back, and its impact still prevails. The fishermen community, as Ranita rightly said, their life revolves around the seashore only. So, kind of seaborne calamities which they have adapted to some point of extent, but there is always a threshold, you know, a limitation beyond they could really hold. for it. So that one instance was tsunami.
Mhm.
That has been devastating in few places, but like the conscious amongst the fishermen is almost the same because they are seafaring, one, and the second one is like their livelihood is not seen to them like any other kind of livelihood. So this is completely invisible in some point of time that we could also call it as a gamble that the daily life text of our as it happens to be a pilot initiative. It is multi-layered, multi-species bioshield, which is said to be conscious amongst these fishermen. Though they are fisher folks, and a little bit, of a lesser value towards greenery, meaning in the sense like on the daily basis, if it is existing around, fine. And they are more conscious about a small scale within the household habitation, be it chilies, be it tomato, though they are conscious about like this kind of a system is going to surely save their life. And that has happened very consciously after tsunami, where they had come to know that like where there had been sand dunes or a thick vegetation had really saved lives, properties. So on this background, seeds with the help of ADRRN initiated this bioshield context amongst 9 villages.
You talk about that context of the impact that the communities have faced several times over landmark cyclones or tsunamis that have hit the coastlines. So, what is the learning that the communities have taken from those disasters that they're able to now bring into the discussion around risk reduction in the first place?
The only thing which devastated their capacity towards it was tsunami, like which was completely post tsunami. The capacity building by the intervening NGOs was, I know everybody knows, like it was beyond any kind of exclamation which could be made. The type of intervention, the scale of interventions, and through which how much the fisher folks capacitated, they were quite welcoming because they were theoretically accepting or conceptually accepting, yes, something of this setup is going to be of a great help. But when it came to the practicality of it, like there was a kind of an mitigation which has to be initiated amongst their consciousness, amongst their practice, amongst their sort of practical involvement within the context of what we were trying to implement.
So I think Prabhakarji has mostly covered the background of who the community is, essentially because their dependency is directly on fishing activities for income. So any change in weather patterns, rough seas, cyclone, slightest bit of intrusions can affect their ultimate livelihoods, safety, and even household stability. So that is an understanding as you live in a very vulnerable shoreline as such, understanding within the community mutually that something definitely needs to be done. But during these cyclonic periods, the risks that are coming to majorly their livelihoods, and not just that, even the accessibility to the roads, electricity, drinking water, all of these additional things can also get disrupted. They are very welcoming to have the theoretical acceptance of something that needs to be done. So what is that something? This is where SEEDS brings up solutions in discussing with what can be done, how can we strengthen this vulnerable belt, how the communities, when they've already lived through multiple disasters over the years and even their past generations, where the resilience was needed. How were they vulnerable? What immediately impacted, whether it was the water that came directly up to the shore, is that the first strike of the impact? So how do we stop that first line? So it's these things that we collaboratively worked with the community to find solutions. And that's when they became more involved. As the process of discussions continued with multiple members of their community, the process led to finding the right solution that was required at the right time, is what I would say.
Right. As you've just mentioned, working with the communities is key to making sure that the resilience response is built up from the ground up for the communities actually dealing with these kinds of disasters. But often it is the case that ecological restoration is designed in offices and then imposed on communities. What did you do differently to make sure that this was more community led? And from their learnings and experiences, with you bringing in the external knowledge and systems that you could to support the communities going forward?
I think it's a great question. But like I said, it's important that the community is definitely involved in the first until the end of the project. So from the very beginning, we ensure that there are multiple rounds of discussions. There's months of making in the process, and that is even before the project started. So when SEEDS as an organization works, in the forefront of disasters, we map out vulnerability areas within the country, we've identified with NDMA about 225 vulnerable districts in India, which are at the risk of multiple climatic disasters. So when we're doing the study, we understand, we do our ground research, and we get involved in understanding from the people directly that where the need is required. So in these cases, within the Tamil Nadu community, we've involved in discussions with panchayat members, fishing community leaders, youth groups. And I think Prabhakarji will definitely tell you how youth played a very important part during our project. Women in the villages, because some of them are women-led communities, and just to understand how their coastal spaces are actually used in the daily life. So things like boat access, common pathways, grazing areas, water availability, everything that people gathered socially all mattered while planning the plantation process. So the community's guidance essentially helped us shape how and where the bioshields could be developed in a very practical way. This involved even selecting the type of saplings and trees that would be used in the later part, let's say where we see the impact in about 4 to 5 years, or even after, when the saplings mature into bigger trees, there would be livelihood opportunities from the tree-bearing fruits, such as coconuts or neem. They are going to be useful for the community members to utilize in many other aspects, and they're also traditionally part of their cultural, community to have certain trees retain in their villages. So their perspective brought a very practical understanding to the long-term maintenance and community priority. So we facilitate this term called a participatory action process, or participatory approach is what I would say. So it's not just asking about people for approval. We bring a solution and we just ask them to participate in it, but it is ensuring that the people are part of the whole thinking, planning, and the ownership process, so that even when the intervention is complete, they are still associated with the project on their own.
Ranita, you've talked about some of the long-term gains of creating a bioshield in a coastline like this that goes beyond the disaster risk, but also adding to the livelihoods of the local communities. And Prabhakarji, earlier you had also mentioned about how these particular fishing communities are used to fishing as their main source of life and income, and that sort of slight resistance or a lack of familiarity with farming or with cultivating at a larger scale. So how did the communities take to that?
As a bit to cross towards the previous question, that it was made in the desk. Huh? How would it transcend it into the seashores and fishermen's mind? So the point was, it was not new for them. The only thing is, like, they don't have time for it, because disaster strikes somewhere once, but there is a daily disaster of their stomach, which really turmoils on different in Cuddalore, where it's not only tsunami, like every year. That's a very what you call like disaster prone district. Mostly cyclones, which had planted enough big trees, fine. But there were other places like where even those coconut trees after tsunami had fallen down because of sea erosion and crippling the place for us to plant some bioshil. So we did not bring blueprints to make them understand. They were aware of it. Like only thing is the opportunity. You know, will anybody come and do it for us? And making them do, of course, like all these strategies of this developmental tools and measurements, like which is part of our NGO's strength, were utilized. And in spite of it, but their first priority is to go fishing and doing it. And this large scale. So those lines were adhered to with the consensus and acceptance of the existing system within the village, because planting and those things are like one time, two time activities. But there is a big activity waiting. Huh? Huh? You have to water them. You have to safeguard them. We are trying to motivate it. Of course, when it comes to one plant, one tree, there is an expert suggestions given by n number of people. When it comes to 500 plants, it's a bit flabbergasting for them. So something has to build up amongst you to talk about like, yes, this is our village, we will plan. So that kind of consciousness is slowly building up. Biology has its own time. You see, it should be another 2.5 years, 3 years closely to realize for them. These small ones have grown up to some extent for them to really feel that, like, because earlier, like, it was coconut, it grows. But now, like, you have Sharina, which is there for 5 to 6 layers, which amounts to some 200 to 300 sapling. And behind that, you have one layer of Pungama, the specia, coconut to grow. And of course, initially they were enthused, but the labor and effort to put in, like, which is very new, because like they are seafaring and they go for a few hours, which is even more tiring than this. They come back and the practice is like they relax. So this is not going to do something on the returns. It's more on a notional context. Like also many of them, they were very happily telling it like, if it grows, like we will be spending most of our times in the shades of those grooves. It's not like coastal forest, and it's a groove where you have casuarina in thick, and then you have all these species in thick, like where I would share a small thing. While I went back to Pulicat to see it, like at some point, half of the villagers are lying down there with having hammocks. They say it's a pleasure being here owing to the scorching sun and this shade which gives and the breeze which comes.
Thank you so much for so beautifully describing how integral it is for community ownership to really come into the picture for not just a project like this to work, but for disaster resilience and risk reduction to be imbibed into the cultural ethos of how communities participate in their land and with the environment around them. I think it also brings us to another aspect which is very integral for this system to work, which is also local government ownership. So when you worked with local governments, local panchayats in the traditional systems to begin the work or to continue the work on restoring ecosystems so that they're maintained long after a project like this ends and it's sustained into the functioning of a community and its local bodies.
A political scenario behind it. When it comes to the local government part, uh, all during the coast, from the state's perspective, the forest department has taken an initiative of going for a large scale, long term and forecasted uh, notion on planting palm trees in large numbers all through the coast, like a blanket approach, which is unwelcoming part also in one point, like where in few of the villages here, we had planted these samplings in between the saplings of palm trees, which had already been pasted between fishing hamlet, the residential area, and the shore and the sea. And then when it comes to the government, uh, it's a sorry scenario to tell it in Tamil Nadu because local panchayat elections and other things did not take place for a long time. Mm. So the local panchayat elected members take and other things are in when it comes to the government or the statutory local panchayats. So the fishing hamlets are in this coastal regulatory zone, which has the largest stake on the state and the central government to play on. All this traditional fishermen panchayats, they are not the statutory panchayats. They are also called local village panchayat, which is called like Ur Nirvagam of the village. They have an complete control. Say, for instance, like we have made this. The government as a point like cannot question them like without our permission how can you plant trees because they have their cut rights. When I went back to Pulicat after this all came to see like how we could bridge a little bit of knowledge with those fishermen. There were new patches which have come with fences already in Pulicat, and that was through local panchayats like where they had an provision to really bring up trees and watering support also.
I was wondering what does success actually look like 5, 10 years down the line, and not just at the end of this project in 12 months?
We've discussed intensively about how we came to the community. We've also discussed about how we participated with the community, how various government departments and organizations have been with us throughout the whole planning, plantation, and in the future maintenance process also. We've also understood the earlier bioshield work that we did in Pulicat in 2009 to 11. But for us, what success looks like is not just the intervention of the project sites, but when we see that the bioshields are not just a standalone intervention, but they are also part of the community landscape itself. So from 5 to 10 years from now, we hope to see stronger and denser coastal green belts where communities are actively part of like these bioshields when they grow bigger. I mean, in the future years, the trees, as Prabhakar said, they are part of their lives. So community members or youth groups having hammocks in the trees, it means that the trees are within their own neighborhood. They're part and parcel of them, their future kids growing up. This is what we aim to see. And not just that, the stronger and the denser coastal belt, which eventually recognizes the value of the reduction in the extreme disaster. This is what we actually aim to see. So I think long-term success is not just the survival of trees overall, is where we see culturally where ecological restoration becomes a part of local resilience and future coastal planning.
That's very wonderfully summarized. I think you're looking beyond just the aspect of climate resilience, but building communities also to be cognizant of the world around them and their future generations and their implications and how they're integrated into the overall ecosystem. I think you've already answered a bit of the next question, but what do you feel would be one insight from your project that you think other organizations across coastal regions in Asia or around the world should hear?
Nature-based solutions should not be seen separately from disaster resilience, because in a lot of the practices today that we've seen, nature-based intervention is quite independently understood, but we see it as a hand-in-hand with future disaster resilience. So to become a part of how the resilience itself. So for a long time, disaster management conversations were focused mainly on response and harder infrastructure, which is essentially shelter construction uh, or something with infrastructure development, But climate risks, which are increasingly known to us and now becoming more frequent and almost a part of our daily lives now, we're seeing that ecosystems can play a very, very important protective role for our future, particularly. So along this Tamil Nadu pilot project that we've done, and some of our coastal resilience work we've also done in mangrove rejuvenation and restoration in the Sundarbans, which brings about bioshield and coastal vegetation into the picture. And in the urban areas, we're seeing heat adaptation through public spaces, cooling intervention, using nature-based solutions, hyper-locally available solutions, uh, water access, and restoring green cover. So what we see at Seeds is through our interventions, we are designing how nature-based solutions and climate disaster resilience can intersect, and how vulnerable communities and districts can become a part of this process. So I think the larger lesson is that resilience is not only about responding after disaster, but it's about reducing this exposure, reducing the stress on communities, and strengthening the local systems before the crisis intensifies, is what I would say. And these nature-based solutions are powerful because they do multiple things together. They also protect ecosystems, support the communities, improve the local environment, and building resilience in ways that should be evolving over time. Maybe Prabhakarji, you can add some learnings from the ground.
Like one thing is here when they had planted it and when the trees were growing, the youths who were in one village specifically, like whenever the community mobilizer or the social our staff were doing it, like there were two or three interesting boys like were doe-tailing him. At one point of time, they started asking like, Anna, can I have a piece of net for it? Huh? Yes, yes, surely. Our man is a very duty bound guy. He said, like, first we will put the fence. If there is anything left, we can give you for their volleyball net. Mhm. I'm talking about the ownership and the type of indulgence it happens on a personalized manner is like those tubes and other things got damaged because road was laid, and these three boys were so angry for past 2 days we are not able to, and then immediately they went across, found a tube, laid it under so that the wheels could go above, and then our people, those village leaders, they came hovering around telling it like, you see our boys have put some pipe, can you give some money for that? And these boys, they fought with the leaders, telling it like, I brought it from my house, it is not your the kind of things like how it brings up. And in few other villages they have planted enough vegetable trees within the plot to make it creep in the fence. People come inside and they have their own way of using it, utilizing it, and benefiting from it. And there was a local adaptation which I have to mention. Is like in one village where the fence was there and the cattles are everywhere. So cattles, they had an cakewalk inside. And then what they did was like we just showed a couple of photographs. They had there are two big temples, and in which like they collect lot of saris for festivals. So they wanted to use the saris to cover the fence so that the cattles, only if they see the greenery inside, they feel like So that initiative, it came up with them. Like these are few insights like where I wanted to tell the innovations or the initiatives which spontaneously come from the people for their place. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful stories from the ground about how people approach this with their own human nature, inherently cultivating these habits into who they are. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. It's been very exciting, very interesting to learn about your project, but I think we'll have to call it a day for now. If there's anything else specifically that you would like to add, please go ahead.
We see these pictures and we feel really delighted to see that community has their, or members, or in people usually have their own ways of how they belong part of the process. They make it their own. I think I would say that this is the direction that we hope to see our interventions go forth. We want to we're looking to expand the work to more villages who are at the vulnerability of disasters within the coastline. Our priority is to look at the entire eastern coastal belt of India, which is the most vulnerable for cyclones, and you can see them every year. The Bay of Bengal has the highest cyclones every year. So the idea that our interventions, our bioshields, mangrove restoration, rejuvenation, coastal protection is not just seen as seeds interventions or projects. It is our community-owned protective ecosystems. And this is where we hope to continue our work with disaster and climate resilience.
Absolutely. We wish you all the luck. And thank you once again for joining us on ADRRN Dialogues today and for sharing the stories behind how SEEDS works along the Tamil Nadu coastline. I think this conversation has showed us how ecological restoration can become much more than an environmental effort. It can also strengthen disaster preparedness, protect livelihoods, and build long-term community resilience across the board, across the coastline. From restoring native bioshields to working closely with local communities, the stories that you've brought up, working with the panchayat systems, your work highlights the value of combining that local knowledge and participation with nature-based solutions in ways that are both practical and sustainable, and like Prabhakarji and Anita, you explained, are also enjoyable to the communities at the end of the day, and they understand the value of those new systems or different systems and what they are used to deal with their climate risks in the long term. We really appreciate your time and insights today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Priti. Pleased to be here.